ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our visitors. May I remind the visitors that if they have phones, could you please make sure they're on silent or turned off, and that members of the public are not allowed to take part in the debate. Okay? And these council meetings are recorded, so if any of the councillors wish to speak, please turn on your microphone. Do you have any apologies for absence?
Apologies, Provost, from Councillor Beattie, Councillor Boyes, Councillor Emery and Councillor Russell.
Sorry, who was the third one you mentioned there? Councillor who?
Councillor Beattie, Boyes, Emery and Russell.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Provost.
The order of business.
Provost, as is printed in the agenda, can I draw members' attention to the additional report by the Chief Executive which was circulated to members late yesterday?
So, am I understanding correctly that the paper marked 3A will be taken first then?
That's the intention, Provost, yeah.
Okay, thank you. We now have item number 3A, a report by Kenneth Lawrie, the Chief Executive.
Thank you, Provost. The purpose of this report is to advise the Council of the content of the interim report from the Incident Management Team, which will be received by the Board of NHS Lothian next week. It is appropriate that this report be considered in advance of the Council's own report at item 4, so that elected members have a full appreciation of the IMT's report in considering the recommendations put forward by Council officers in the latter report. In terms of the recommendations, the Council is asked to note that the IMT is established to provide independent advice regarding the maintenance and protection of the public's health. The Chair and members of the IMT must be able to act in the best interests of the affected population, regardless of their employer. That the Council's statutory duty of partnership under various acts, particularly the Public Health Act Scotland 2008, and also note that the Council and NHS are working together in partnership as evidenced in the requirement to develop and implement the Joint Health Protection Plan. Provost, with your agreement, I would invite Professor Alison McCallum, who is the Director of Public Health and Health Policy, to introduce the NHS Lothian report.
Okay, Professor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. This interim report sets out the history of the Health Protection Team and the Incident Management Team's formation and response to the detection of excess carbon dioxide from mine gases in the houses in New Bars in Gore Bridge. The purpose of the IMT's formation, the Incident Management Team's formation, is to protect public health and to advise the statutory bodies, that's the Health Board and the local authority in this instance, on what needs to be done to protect the public's health. It doesn't override the statutory obligations of the local authority. The purpose is to make recommendations and to ensure investigations are undertaken that will reduce to a minimum levels of illness and harm suffered by the population from this sort of exposure, and to collect information that can be used to assess the level of risk, communicate the level of risk, work out what effective recommendations for the future would be, and to provide advice on how to both manage the incident and to prevent incidents like this happening in the future. So we became involved on the 26th of March when general practitioners contacted us about concerns about the health of local people who'd been presenting with symptoms that were found to be associated with exposure to excess carbon dioxide. Following that, we worked with the local authority and with their consultants Fairhurst and with the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency and obtained independent expert advice to ensure that there was monitoring of the levels of CO2 and that we worked with the Council to ensure that appropriate information from a health point of view was available to residents. And we're aware that there was a fair amount of investigation of this that had gone on before we were involved. In terms of managing the risks, general practitioners were advised of the symptoms and we advised the Council on what to do in terms of ventilation, and we had long discussions on how to make the equipment that was in there for monitoring work for the best, in the best interests of the residents, in allowing alarms to go off when the threshold levels that we determined based on the research evidence were reached, both from a short-term point of view, so if it hit a trigger, or if over a 24-hour period it had hit a different trigger. And so we were conscious both of the need for short-term action, which is unwelcome but necessary, but also the need to ensure that we had appropriate information in place in terms of minimising longer-term exposure so that appropriate action could be taken. There are a series of investigations that are not yet complete in terms of the, with the Council, in terms of the precise cause of this carbon dioxide exposure. But what we have in place is a way of carbon dioxide getting into the houses and exposing residents to potential harm, which is currently being monitored and appropriate short-term action taken. What we need to do for the long term is to ensure that that exposure does not continue. So in the longer term, our assessment of solutions would be on the basis of what do we need to do to ensure that residents are not exposed to carbon dioxide levels at the level they had been in some of the houses in the future. And some of those will involve looking at different options for housing in that area. What we recognised very quickly was that in order to do that properly, that would take some time. And our advice to the Council is then to separate out what needs to be done in terms of non-recurrence of release of gas into houses and the needs of the residents to be able to live in suitable housing, to go about their business, to receive care and support from the Council, and for their kids not to have their schooling disrupted, and as far as possible to minimise not just the physical risk of unpleasant symptoms or the much lower risk of longer-term harm, but also the stresses and strains associated with having thought you were moving into housing in a nice neighbourhood and then finding out that that idea and that community is being disrupted. So our recommendation to the Council was that, yes, there needs to be technical work to identify what the best technical solution is for the area in which those houses are, whether that's looking at remediation or whether that's replacing those houses, but actually to focus on what are the needs of the population in the area, what kind of housing and community best meets their needs. That will have to be done on an individual basis, and for the meeting the needs of the population to be the thing that takes the time that determines what the housing solutions are for people. And one of my team is working with the Care for People group as part of that process. So in terms of recommendations, there are a number of things that we've put in here that basically say if we were having a research study into how to assess the impact of exposure to CO2 in housing, we wouldn't have started from here, but all of the things that have been put in place, we're happy with the monitoring and with the fact that there are council officers in regular contact with residents. But we do recommend a precautionary approach, so erring on the side of caution in terms of monitoring, in terms of trigger events and in terms of alarm. So while all of the kind of scientific stuff is going on to determine how gas was able to get into the houses and cause people symptoms, then our recommendation is that we need to work together to ensure that the needs of the local population are met in terms of their housing, and that for any future developments on that site, that appropriate work is undertaken that would mean that there was no recurrence. I hope that's clear, and I hope that explains the situation to people in this fairly straightforward way.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, I think obviously on this report, certainly welcome the report from Professor McCallum, and I don't think there will be any disagreement from members on the recommendations in this report. Obviously there is significant content in the following paper, and I wondered if perhaps it would be useful if we kept the majority of our debate for following that, and if we need to, that we can refer back to this in questioning at that stage, and just have the maximum flexibility to cross-reference the two reports rather than focusing on one and then the other, if that was met with members' agreement.
Councillor Muirhead.
I understand all the debate and things like that after the next paper comes forward, but I do have a specific question on this one, if it's in order. It's Professor McCallum, thanks for presenting the paper. None of it comes really as much a surprise in terms of the difference between that and the paper that we've had in our hands for a week, but there's one particular part that I'd just like to refer to, and that's on page A10. Right at the sort of fourth last line on that. Obviously, key to people remaining in their properties, pending any potential solutions that we might have to rehouse them, is the fact that they are in a safe situation. And key to that is the adequacy of the monitoring equipment that we have in each and every one of these houses. So it's a bit concerning to read that the phrase there, that the IMT has been working to verify that the devices are effective. This work is still in progress. That concerns me somewhat, that the barrier, if you like, the thing that's in between the tenants and the carbon dioxide are these meters, and we appear not to be confident that the meters are effective in some way, shape or form, which I'm not clear from this paper what that is. And indeed, I spoke to somebody 2 minutes before this meeting started who informed me that, that one of the alarms has been going off consistently today, and they're unable to switch it, to get it to go down, even with renting the property, so it's been switched off. Now, I accept that there's an officer still on site, and has been for, I think, several hours, but is there a problem? Are there some concerns with the quality or the suitability of the meters that we're using?
Thank you for that. The Council has worked very closely with Fairhurst on our advice in terms of having the thresholds for the alarms going off being at a precautionary level. Most of the studies that are done of this sort of exposure have been done either with workers or with in schools particularly, and the equipment that's being used, this is not an exact science. What we've done is we've worked very closely to ensure that the threshold levels are appropriate and that we apply a lot of scrutiny to when alarms go off, why have they gone off, what's happened, and can we replicate the levels? So are the machines calibrated properly? And have asked some fairly detailed questions, both of housing officers and of Fairhurst in that regard, and indeed of the people who make the equipment. So we've tried to, I mean, this is not perfect, this is not a research study. We've tried as far as possible to ensure that a precautionary approach is taken at all times, that at fairly low levels of excess carbon dioxide exposure, people do get nuisance symptoms, which they can go to their GP and have investigated. In most cases, the levels of carbon dioxide you would be able to vent your house very quickly and have that dissipate. I can't tell you about the incident that's going on at the moment, but what I can tell you is we've worked very hard to ensure that the levels that we're looking at are precautionary and that we are constantly verifying the appropriateness, the calibration, is everything working as it should be?
Yeah. But we're not there yet, and that's my concern. I witnessed one particular alarm that was going off virtually when you closed the door for half an hour, and the reading level was 5,000. My concern with that was it appeared that the 5,000 was the maximum level that the meter would go to. So we actually didn't have any idea whether it was considerably in excess of that at that time. So, you know, there are issues, I think, with the meters, and we need to be 100% satisfied that these meters are giving people adequate protection if they're remaining in the properties for the amount of time it's likely to take to find alternative arrangements.
I mean, I don't disagree with the fact that that's something we need to ensure is that precautionary approach is maintained. I guess the issue about having, for this purpose, the issue about having maximum levels is such that we would expect action to be taken at 1,000 if there was a spike, and 5,000 if that's what it was over the 24-hour period. So that's the whole point of having a precautionary approach, is that we're not using this to measure the level in the house. Actually, when it gets to a certain point, action needs to be taken.
Okay. I'm well aware that it's very, very hot in here, so if anyone wants to take off their jackets and ties, please feel free to do so. The Council happy to move on to item 4 and take the two of them as if one. Okay? Now move on to item number 4, a report by Kenneth Lawrie, the Chief Executive.
Thank you, Provost. This is quite a detailed, in some ways quite a technical report with a number of appendices. And today in the Council chamber we have a number of officers who are able to comment on any details which are set out in the report or any questions that members may have. So with that in mind, I'd propose to give a relatively brief overview of the report. And once I've done that, Provost, with your permission, I'd like to ask Evelyn McHugh to say something specifically about the care for people aspect of the report, which I think is important and reflects the stage that we're now entering. In terms of the purpose of the report, it is, of course, to inform Council on the issues in relation to gas penetration at New Bars Crescent, also in the extra care housing at Gore Avenue, to outline the options for rectification for consideration by the Council, and to ensure the protection of public health and the long-term resolution for the site. And having now considered the report of the INT, that gives some additional context to that discussion. I think members at this stage are broadly familiar with the background to this as set out at section 2. I would draw your attention to the specific circumstances contributing to this incident as set out on the top of page 4 of your agenda, and also the actions that have been taken with regard to this to date in relation to monitoring, the alarms and the buzzers which we've just been speaking about, the 24/7 response team, the provision of advice and information, the decanting of tenants where necessary, the activation of the Care for People group, and the development of contingency plans if there is a need at any time for an emergency evacuation. I would also point out that the gas monitoring is still being carried out, with a final report expected in July of this year. A chronology of events, a fairly summarised chronology of events, is set out at Appendix 1, and just for the purposes of clarification, as set out in the IMT report, the health protection involvement commenced at the end of March 2014. In terms of the complexities of the legal position and liabilities, that's set out at paragraph 2.2, and all I'd draw members' attention to at this stage is the fact that the legal opinion is that advice is obtained on the probability of the cost of the preferred options being recovered before a final decision on the future use of the site is taken, and that's reflected in the recommendations. In terms of insurance, the Council's insurers are unable to advise further until they have additional information regarding the cause and the catalogue of events and new buyers. As members are aware, an independent report was commissioned by the Council from Fairhurst Consulting relating to the potential ground gas risk assessment, and that was received by the Council in March. There were 9 recommendations within that report. 7 have been implemented by the Council, and the other 2, which relate to legal implications and liability and the costed remedial options, are indeed the subject of this report. Turning to the options at section 3, the report sets out 5 options in respect of the site, and Fairhurst have made observations in relation to each of these, and these are set out at Appendix 2 to the report. The options are to retrofit a gas membrane solution in all 64 houses, to demolish and rebuild the houses incorporating gas membranes, to demolish simply the 5 decanted houses and rebuild whilst retrofitting gas membranes to the remaining properties, to leave the 5 decanted properties unoccupied whilst continuing with a monitoring regime on the remaining properties, or finally to demolish all 64 and market the site as a potential development site. Details of each of the options are set out in the report, and officers are in the chamber who can deal with any questions arising which members may have. However, I draw your attention to paragraph 3.6, where there is a summary assessment of these options. And this indicates that, in effect, there are only 2 of the 5 options, and that's option 2 and option 5, that provide a sufficient guarantee as to their effectiveness in terms of the protection of the public health of residents, and the recommendations set out that we should move forward on the basis of that analysis. The costs of the options are set out at section 4. Again, I'd ask you to note that all of these costs are based on a 60-year life cycle. Section 4.1 relates to the NHS role, which I think has been clearly set out in the previous report. At this stage, I would simply ask members to disregard the draft IMT option appraisal attached to Appendix 3, simply because that is superseded by the version on pages 5 and 6 of the IMT interim report at item 3A. Turning to what at this stage I think is the most important aspect of the report, and it's about the support and protection of residents. And the Council's primary concern throughout the situation has to be to ensure the safety of each household. And in that context, 5 households have already been relocated, and the Care for People group has been activated. Having recognised the continuing uncertainty that residents are experiencing and the inevitable disruption that will occur to their lives, the Care for People group are focusing on the physical and mental well-being of the residents. The matters under consideration in this regard are set out at the bottom of page 11 and the top of page 12. And these are the move to suitable alternative permanent homes for all residents, undertaken at a pace to protect health and minimise disruption, the effects of the disruption as a result of the move, the needs of children and families in regard to education, medical matters and the proximity to healthcare settings, the identified needs of each individual involved, the maintenance of community connections and the provision of agreed information and support. And we are committed as a council, and must be committed as a council, to working with residents and effectively across agencies, particularly with NHS Lothian, in taking forward these issues. At section 5 of the report, resource implications are set out. There will be a requirement to continue to allocate significant resources to this project. And it is noted in the 4th paragraph that local authorities are required to ensure that sufficient resources are made available to the incident management team to carry out its role as noted in the Special Council report on the 20th of May. This includes the requirement that actions to protect public health are not delayed for financial or contractual reasons. This section of the report also sets out the impact of the options for the site in terms of the housing revenue account and phase 2 of the Council's house building programme. I want to turn to the recommendations which are on page 15, section 7. The Council has recommended to note the actions established by the Council and NHS Lothian in connection with the protection of public health, to note the options and the recommendations to progress option 2 or option 5, subject to legal opinion and taking full cognizance of the IMT findings, to note the costs outlined with each option as detailed in sections 3.1 to 3.5, to note that a full quality impact assessment will be required prior to the final selection of the preferred option, to authorise the Director resources to continue to progress actions and approve resource requirements to maintain public safety, to authorise the Joint Director, Health and Social Care, to continue to progress actions and approve resource requirements arising from Care for People, including those associated with the permanent relocation of all residents, to approve the payment of home loss and disturbance payments, to note the intention to update the Council as necessary. As stated, there's a number of colleagues in the Chamber who can deal with detailed questions or inquiries that members may have. But, Provost, with your permission, I'd be grateful if Evelyn McHugh could give just a brief update in relation to the Care for People aspects.
Thank you.
Thank you, Provost. The Care for People group is established under the Civil Contingencies Act, and its responsibility is to respond to the needs of people in an emergency. In this situation, its primary concern is the health and well-being of all of the people who are affected by this incident. And as well as the precautionary approach described by Professor McCallum in relation to managing the risks around exposure to CO2, the group is also particularly concerned by the stress arising from the uncertainty and the disruption that people living in these houses have been subject to for what is now a considerable length of time. At this stage, the Care for People group is focusing on moving forward in relation to the relocation of tenants. The primary aim is to move as many tenants as possible into permanent solution as quickly as is practicable. And in doing so, we're seeking to mitigate the impact of further disruption and further uncertainty in people's lives. In terms of moving that forward, a team of professionals is now in place. They will be based up in Gore Avenue, number 12. The team is a multidisciplinary team. It's made up of a number of professionals, some of whom are already known to residents in the area. It includes a housing officer, an occupational therapist, a public health practitioner, and we'll also have staff in there who will be able to maintain close contact with schools. That team will work with the whole of the community, but it will also focus on each individual household to get a good understanding of needs so that we can identify the best possible permanent solution that will be right for each individual household. We recognise that every household's needs are different and unique to them, and it's really important that going forward that we work with every individual household. We will undertake a risk assessment alongside people. We will use, where appropriate, professional advice, and this will help us to make decisions alongside people around the planning and the timing of individual house moves. We will pay attention to children's needs in relation to their schooling. We will also pay attention to older people's needs and their need for stability and security. And we will pay attention to people with special needs, many of whom are living in adapted property that are designed around their needs. The team are also actively looking at how we identify appropriate housing for the community. In particular, we're looking at available council stock within the area. We're also in discussion with registered social landlords in terms of other stock that may be available, but we're also looking at opportunities for the purchase of housing. We are also at an early stage of looking at a planned phase 2 development and looking at how quickly we can bring that forward. Should a group of tenants in the area wish to remain together, we can look at how we can accommodate that. The team will also ensure that the tenants are supported around their move. We know that many individuals are concerned about the additional costs involved in the situation. The Council is committed to meeting all reasonable costs incurred by tenants as a consequence of the requirement to move, and we will, where possible, provide practical assistance around the move. Having a base up in Gore Avenue will also provide an opportunity to do much more proactive work around helping tenants cope with their situations. We look to provide advice and support on a whole range of issues as identified by tenants themselves. The public health practitioner will work with tenants around their concerns about their healthcare needs, but will also work very proactively with the local GP practice to ensure that health services are responsive and people have access to the best possible information and support during this period. The houses in Gore Avenue, the extra care houses, are also included, and we will pay particular attention to the people who are located there. It's extra care housing. These houses have been designed to meet the needs of people with high-level support needs. The project manager who was involved in planning the changes at Pentland House, where we moved people from Pentland House onto other suitable placements, and the opening of Cowan Court, will also be involved in this project. Again, we will be using our expertise in relation to working with older people and making sure that that transition is managed well in their interests. Extra care housing is integral to the model at New Bars Care Home, and going forward we'll need to review the model and look at what adjustments we need to make in terms of provision for older people in the area to ensure that we continue to provide good accommodation and support for older people in a joined-up way. We're also aware that there have been a number of concerns around security on the Crescent, and we know that as the community changes and people move out, that will become a greater concern. We've had early discussions through Community Safety with our colleagues in the police, and we will look at what we can do to ensure the safety and are exploring remedies such as using CCTV, etc. But again, we will work with the local community in relation to those solutions. I'll pause there, Provost, and happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you very much for these reports. It is hugely disappointing that this big investment the Council's made and its commitment to tenants for safe and secure housing has not actually been met. And I apologise to the any harm that's been caused to people and trauma they've suffered, and hope that we can have this resolved as soon as possible. The time to look and analyse reports from the specialists, so responsibility for any failures is for a future date, and this situation is really complex for all the people involved, and it does have an impact on our local community. At this meeting today, we're concentrating on moving forward with assurances to the tenants that we do have their interests to the fore of our deliberations. My colleagues and I also acknowledge all the work that's been going on to resolve this situation. The council officers, our stakeholders, NHS Lothian being one of them, and others, and we do appreciate the work. However, our tenants are living in anxious times, and we're keen to move them on to safe permanent housings which will support their needs sooner rather than later, as we need to address this as our major priority. Unfortunately, we also acknowledge that the timescales can't be determined today, but I know that everyone involved will work to progress the matter so timescales can be worked out for folk. I'm also encouraged that the on-site tenant drop-in office is now open, and we've been given the details of the opening times today, and this will facilitate private conversations for all the tenants with various professionals involved in the process. Well, Evelyn's already said housing specialist, health specialist, a police presence and others. This team, we hope, will build up relationships with you all so as to ensure good solutions for you, and a plan for every household to be considered, and one that will include your wishes. I also think that we need to have some formal confirmation in writing as soon as we can to the tenants about any assistance they can expect to receive from the Council for their very specific circumstances, and would hope this could be done as soon as possible. And in that respect, I propose that we accept the recommendations listed at number 7 in the Council report. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Provost. And I am aware there's a proposal that Councillor Muirhead, I am very grateful that he shared that with me earlier. So I won't say anything about that, obviously, until Councillor Muirhead has the opportunity to do so. But I think certainly where we are, as we've heard, public safety and health has to be the absolute first and foremost priority. Councillor Johnson says, and I totally agree, that looking into the how and why this happened, that's for another day. We do need to do that, and that is something we do need to get to the bottom of, but that could be a very, very long and expensive process, and we cannot put anyone's health at risk while that takes place. So I think it is, from that point of view, I hope helpful that we are able to give some form of clarity, or starting to give clarity on the direction that has to be taken here, because as we can see from the interim IMT report, the only options that are reasonably possible are those that involve the demolition of the properties. It's deeply unfortunate, but it is clearly the best outcome to ensure we have that safety going forward. Obviously, a lot of time will be taken in bringing that together, but in the meantime, and I understand from speaking to the Director, and maybe Evelyn could confirm this, but the fact that we are having to focus on individual households and the conversations about the very specific needs and unique situations that every household finds themselves in, I understand that these conversations will be starting tomorrow. So it is an immediate action that's taking place off the back of us having this council meeting this afternoon, that we can start to pull together the needs, the aspirations and the wants of residents, so we can find these permanent solutions, some which hopefully we can have in place very simply, very straightforwardly. Others will, by their nature, take more time because adaptations may be needed. We may need to take account of very special circumstances. I think what is clear, and what I hope we're all in agreement as councillors today, is that we will want to do everything we possibly can to help and support the residents who are living in the properties, and the fact that they are going to have to be moved. It is no fault of the residents. It's something that has been forced upon them. And I mean, I certainly can't even begin to imagine the stress that this is causing to households. We just need to make sure that we are doing everything we possibly can to help and support and make this as easy and straightforward a process, as difficult as that might be, but as easy and straightforward as we possibly can.
Councillor Muirhead.
Thanks, Provost, and I don't disagree with anything that the Leader of the Council has just said in terms of where we go from here, and the fact that where the causes for this and the fault for this lies is something for another day. My primary concern is, and always has been for the beginning of this situation, was to look after the interests of the constituents that I represent. I think we need to try and understand what New Byres Crescent is like. I remember when it was first built, and you had the I certainly had the view that it was quite a self-contained, small, relatively small, wee council estate, very convenient to the shops, going to be convenient for the railway and things like that. Had the potential to be a nice, vibrant, small section, if you like, small community within Gore Bridge. And what we actually want in these circumstances, I certainly do, is for people to see these houses as almost their own. And I think, getting that kind of buy-in is what makes successful communities, successful housing estates. And I'm particularly pleased when visiting a lot of the properties in New Byres to see how much money people have invested in their homes, both inside the houses and outside the houses, in their gardens and surrounding area. And that's exactly what we want as a council. We would want to happen in our communities, and it's because of that situation, and it's also because of my involvement in dealing with the families who were decanted for their properties way back in September, and dealing with the issues that they've had to face in that period. And I'm not getting at officers here, because we're all dealing with the unknown and we're trying to react to difficult circumstances. But, everything wasn't as clear-cut as it could have been in terms of how people get dealt with. And it's all very well making statements about how we've got to ensure that we minimise the financial loss, or I think sorry, I lost a bit. Evelyn made a statement about reasonableness. As soon as the word reasonableness comes in, I start to get a bit concerned. Because where people have invested a lot of money in their properties in terms of decoration and other items that are not removable and switchable to wherever they may go, I think it's absolutely vital that people are reimbursed fully for any consequential loss. And it's for that reason that we've put forward the motion to Council today that effectively calls for the principle of no detriment to be agreed here today. I didn't want us to be in a situation where we're having arguments as councillors, as myself, Brian and Kath, having to go and represent the tenants of that street and arguments about interpretations or things. I didn't want us to get into a situation, and I could see it coming, where we determine what a reasonable minimum level is for per bedroom or something like that. I don't think that that is acceptable. That's why, in the motion that I've put before you today, I'm calling for there to be inspections of the properties to determine exactly what's in them. I'm not looking for anybody to make money here, and I'm sure that people are not in a position where they would be wanting to do that either. It's not about that. It's about making sure that people are properly compensated for what they are losing through absolutely no fault of their own. So what I'm suggesting is we inspect the properties prior to anybody moving out to see the level of the type of flooring, carpeting, decoration and things like that, and that we replace everything like for like, obviously depending on the requirements of the tenants in the new property. I think that's vitally important that that happens, and we would avoid getting into situations if we've already inspected the properties. Obviously, something would have to be done in terms of the different would have to be done in terms of the people who had already been decanted for the properties, because that opportunity would no longer exist. I think that the £1,500 home loss compensation that's been referred to in the paper that's before us today should be considered to be separate for any reimbursement of the tenants. That, in my view, is about the almost like a payment for the inconvenience that they are, and that's stating it mildly, that they are having to suffer. Now, it's been suggested to me that that £1,500 could be used to try and alleviate the situation where people incur expenses and then are subsequently reimbursed. The only problem with that is I'm not sure in a lot of circumstances that £1,500 would cover that, when it costs you more than £2,000 to put just a medium quality carpet into the whole of a house. That kind of level isn't going to cut that. Therefore, what I'm calling for is that there is a fund set up so that people who are not in a position to pay up front, or who choose not to pay up front, can have finances made available to them to progress things as quickly as possible, albeit everything requiring to be justified. Moving on to the alternative accommodations, I think it's absolutely vital that we try to, where possible, and Evelyn's talked about this, move people once if we can. Now, in a lot of cases, that isn't going to. I can't see how that is going to be possible, but we should try to do that. It's also important that none of the tenants are forced to accept a house, whether it's temporary or permanent, that they don't believe meets their requirements. We were through it with the tenants that were originally decanted. They were offered half a dozen, I think, maybe even more properties prior to them eventually getting themselves alternative accommodation.
and I just think that we need to make an assessment of what the tenant's requirements are. For example, if somebody's got a front and back door, they quite understandably are no going to accept an upstairs flat or 4 in a block, that kind of thing. I think it would be unreasonable. That would be a detriment to the tenant, and I think we have to accept that we're going to do whatever we can to make sure that that kind of thing doesn't happen. Obviously, the caveat in that is in exceptional cases where there is a danger to life and people have to be moved on a temporary basis. I think we have to accept that is the case. We've also talked about people being able to source their own private lets, obviously through the council. It's absolutely key that they do it through the council, that they don't go away and set something up themselves, because at the end of the day, it's important that the council cover it. So what we're calling for is that the private let should be a similar size and type to the current property that they're in, and not considerably in excess of the requirement, but that an extra room should be permitted if, I'm thinking to ease the situation, if there's a house available with an extra bedroom, that we should allow them to take that. And that if there are any consequences with regards to the bedroom tax, there probably won't be now, but if there is, that is taken on board by the council and any changes, any differences are met by them. And I believe that the council should pay the let rent in full, including any deposits that are required, and that any difference in the council tax between the property that they were in and the property that they are in temporary let of. The issue about moving home, what we're saying here is all moving costs should be met with the council. I've no any reason to believe that wouldn't be the case, and all the arrangements be made with the council. That a packing and unpacking service should be available should the tenants require it. That options to move at weekends be made available for people who are in employment that have difficulty in getting time off during the week. In the event that the tenant is going into temporary accommodation, all the items that they have in their garden should also be stored along with the other items in the property at the council's expense. And the access should obviously be available to their belongings when with reasonable notice, wherever it's being stored. And a number of tenants have also asked that they be supplied with packing cases as soon as possible, because they want to start packing away things and removing things from the premises that they feel that they can do now. We then get to the situation with adaptation, special adapted properties. There are a number of properties on the site, on the new buyer's site, that have been adapted. One in particular that was purpose-built. We need to be certain that the people in these properties get exactly like for like whatever we manage to do to accommodate them. And I think it's been unfortunate that during this whole process it came as a massive shock to me when I spoke to Evelyn just last week when we got the initial report to find that the extra care facilities on Gore Avenue were affected. That is a major blow, I think, to the area, because of the necessity for the proximity to new buyers' care home. I think is very important to these properties, and that's one that we really need to pay particular attention to. I think Evelyn mentioned the potential of some of the people wanting to, if we're no rebuilding, for instance, the New Buyers Crescent area, wanting to be located amongst the friends and neighbours that they've made in the New Buyers Crescent and Gore Avenue area. I therefore think it's really important that the Council commits, subject obviously to checking that it's feasible, for the Green Hall school site to be brought forward as soon as possible. It does give us the opportunity to deal with a number of people at one time to some extent, and no be going through the arguments about or the discussions around suitability of properties if we can build like for like in that location. I know that it doesn't suit everybody, but some people may be happy to go there, so it's important, I think, that we press ahead with that. I think it's also important that we give clear commitment to people who are having to move to accommodation considerably further from the schools to which their children go. I'm conscious of the fact that New Byres Crescent, the end of New Byres Crescent is the road into the school. If the kids are going to Gore Bridge Primary, and it's just up the hill to up a path to effectively to the Slop Hill School as well. If we're moving people a considerable distance from their school, if they're remaining in Gore Bridge, then I think assistance needs to be given to people to help them deal with that. Also the issue of work, where people are working. If they're moving to somewhere where they're put in detriment in terms of their ability to get to their work, then assistance should be considered for people in that circumstance as well. Finally, you'll be glad to know, the relocation out with Gore Bridge. There are a number of people who have indicated that they would prefer to move to another location, and I think that every assistance should be given to finding accommodation in other villages or towns within Midlothian, should they desire, or indeed, as a couple of people have expressed, the chance to be able to relocate to out with Midlothian. And I understand that officers are prepared to work with other councils to see if that kind of request can be accommodated. Sorry for taking so long to go through that, but I really do want to be put on record so that we don't have arguments about interpretation at a later date, because we need this to go as smoothly as we possibly can. The final thing I would say is, and I suppose it's not really for today, but we need to start thinking about, what we're actually going to do in that area, because it's going to be quite a blight on Gore Bridge if these properties, if we decide at the end of the day, which we probably will, to demolish these properties. We need to figure out, we can't be left with a gap in the middle of Gore Bridge that we did have for so many years that ended up bringing the area down. So that's something for further consideration. So, Provost, I'd like to move the proposals on the paper that I've circulated here today to safeguard the interests of the tenants of the New Byres Crescent and Gore Avenue.
Councillor Pottinger.
Reiterating everything that Jim's already said, and concentrating on just a few points on my own. Speaking to many of the tenants, yes, they want the council to be reasonable and flexible. And sometimes within council structures and formal forms and procedures, they seem to be getting the message, that we're bureaucratic and we're not responding appropriately. I'm telling them that the council can respond flexibly and reasonably. Yeah, but the definition of the word reasonable is the word that lawyers love. They love that word. And any decision that's made with those kind of words on it, lawyers will run off in tangents and rub their hands in glee at the number of hours they could spend on debating that word, reasonable. But it's only right that we put in the words no detriment. It's no the tenant's fault, as always been said by many people. So why should they have a detriment, involved in this? And that's obviously the financial losses and any consequential loss. Why should they have any of that to bear themselves? It's not their fault. So we have to put these words in that there isn't any detriment to the tenants. Owen mentioned the needs, the aspirations and the wants of the tenants. They want like for like. They're not wanting palaces. They're just wanting something as good as what they've had, or just maybe marginally better. But they're wanting like for like, and that's all they're wanting, and knowing that, and these views will come out clearer when we have our on-site office opening up very shortly. This office is opening tomorrow afternoon. Some may say it should have been opened a few weeks ago, but because of the communication issues that we've had with the tenants, getting them to understand that we're not just thinking about the 64 homes as a problem, but we're starting to think about them and the issues and their wants and their individual needs. We have to do it on that kind of basis. We've had many words for Kenneth on being generous in the situation, many of the words for being flexible and on the situation. Yes, all this has to be taking place. And the new buyers' residents have to be, shall we say, arm's length for the housing application agenda. They have to be treated as a special case. As tenants that we are forcing to flip, no matter how, if they've been in the house a year or 5 years. We are now forcing them to move to another locality. And the £1,500 payment is because of that. It's not because of any consequential or expenses. The £1,500 that we can give per household is obviously there, is non-contractual. There's no something that's binding them to anything else. It's there for them as an apology amount, if you want, but not any other, as I said, contractual arrangements. Procedures and structures can be slow. People want to know when they're going to go. They also want to know what type of house they're going to get. They're also maybe concerned that if they didn't get in first, they're not going to get a recent one, or whatever. But they have to give the same level of service to all the tenants throughout the whole process. That they're getting no detriment, no consequential loss, a like-for-like house. And we have to effectively communicate this, and I think the site office will be a great way of doing this. The site office will be able to gather the local information, not on a tick box scenario, but on a real sort of interview, about their actual circumstances, and they'll be able to build up a good picture of their current premises and the filing that we can do on that, in a diary, And the last thing I'm going to talk about is the monitoring equipment. I don't want to see a final report in July. I want to see it on continuing monitoring reports, for the people that are still there, to keep it going, till the need is completely gone for this kind of monitoring equipment. I'm aware that some of the residents may be getting blasé to the alarms, and they're not reporting them all. And I've said this on a few occasions. They can't do that. They've got to feed in this information. They've got to keep going. The alarms reliability has been questioned by many. The health reasons has been questioned by many. But the importance of monitoring is there, and for the results to be maintained and gathered and disseminated to the residents. There has to be a two-way street there as well. And given the results out, the level of risk that they're actually involved in, we have to try and give that information to make sure that we're not hiding nothing and we're not deemed to be hiding anything, because we don't want anybody to go into an unsafe circumstances or live in unsafe circumstances, because if the alarms has been activated, we need to know about this, and we need to know, and yes, it's a self-interest as well for tenants to report it, because this kind of information will be taken in the assessment of who's to be moved next, or prioritising, because it's not just a risk assessment, it's also the needs assessment that we're talking about, and the combination of those factors will determine on the process, the way we move forward. But yes, let's put these words in today. There's not going to be any detriment to these tenants, because it's not their fault. There's no consequential loss to when they've actually moved, and their aspirations on like for like will be met by this council.
Councillor Milligan.
Thanks, Provost. Provost, well, I wholly agree. Today's meeting has to be about what we do about the situation we're faced at new buyers. But I don't think I can let today go past without stressing if we look back, this council, it took a really bold step to commit over £100 million to build up to 1,000 houses. This is a large chunk of these houses. We had 2,500 people on our waiting list when we started to build this project. We now, after having built them, and we are ourselves well over 1,000, we now have 4,500 families sitting on our waiting lists. When we undertook this programme, we all accepted quite fully that the council in-house didn't have the expertise to build houses. It wasn't something we done as an everyday job. That's why we brought in the private sector to advise us and to build these houses. So it really is urgently important that we get to the bottom of this, because we need to recoup this money, because this is a big chunk of council houses. We've allocated a further, I think it's £57 million. This is a big chunk of that will be lost if we didn't pursue everything we've got to get that money back. So we'll have to do that, and I don't think today, when we're sitting with two ways that we can move forward, knock them down and leave it, or knock them down and rebuild it, without actually saying something on that. So we urgently need to address that part of it. I've listened to what Owens had to say, Jim and Brian, and I don't think there's a million miles a difference between us. And I was quite interested in Evelyn McHugh's words when she says the council is committed to covering all reasonable costs that were incurred by the residents. What's in Jim's paper isn't he asking for any more than that. He's quite simply saying in black and white terms that we go in and we inspect the houses, and for example, our tenants are paid to, we'll say for example, tile the kitchen, that they recoup that money to allow them to retile the next kitchen that they move into. If they put a patio laid out in the garden, they should be able to recover that, because it's reasonable. As Jim points out, we want people to take good care of council houses. That's what we're about. That's what we ask people to do. You know, if somebody's decorated to a very high standard, they should be able to recoup the cost of that decoration. And throughout the scheme, we will find that people have spent money and prioritised different things, and we should. If you take, for example, somebody might have decided, I've got young kids, I'm just going to put down a cheap and cheerful carpet, and they should be able to recoup that cost. However, if somebody's decided they want top of the range at Axminster and that's what they've put down, then they should be able, of course, to recoup that cost. And that's why I'm saying, and I think Jim's right in saying, an inspection before you go in there allows us to see the standard and the cost that people have invested in their houses, and they get that back. And I think that matches with Evelyn's word, reasonable cost. The one thing we want to avoid here is somebody walking in and say, oh, you get £80 to redecorate a living room, that's the going cost that the council give. We need to avoid that at all cost. There's one thing that I think is really we need to ensure as well, is that when residents have been asked to sign for any money, that there's no wee legal notes on the back there sort of saying, well, if you sign this, you're removing any right to any further action or responsibility. I understand the council quite rightly will be saying we are not responsible for this. This is somebody else who's made the mistake here. However, it's also not the residents' responsibility, so we shouldn't be trying to get any wee legal notes in there. So we make sure anything people are signing for is just that, a receipt for the money for what it's intended for. And as I've said, there isn't that far a difference between us. And in fact, the director quite clearly says any reasonably it will commit to covering any reasonable cost to the residents. So that's what this paper is asking for, and I think it is reasonable to say if a resident has spent a huge amount of money, £20 a square metre on carpet, that they're entitled to say, I want a carpet to that standard when I move to my next house. I think that's reasonable, and it's the same with decor and all the rest of the stuff. And what we're saying here is, let's not leave it to chance. We're quite happy, go in, look at the quality, do an assessment and make sure we have an agreement. I think that's all we're asking for here, and I think we should be able to get an agreement here today.
Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, I mean, Councillor Milligan's right. There's not a million miles between the positions that's been proposed here today, I don't think. I mean, certainly I've mentioned to Councillor Muirhead, I think there are many parts of this motion that would be agreed with immediately. I mean, many of them, in fact, have already been outlined by the Director. Other items like looking at bringing forward the site at Green Hall, I know that's already being looked at as an option to potentially bring that forward. That's not an overnight solution. That's something that would take a bit of time to do, but that is something that's already in chain. But, I mean, on one hand we have The key priority here is looking at every individual circumstance for every household and making sure that the outcome for that household is what is in the best interest of that household. There's no one-size-fits-all here. It's not here's the list of things we have to do and this is what fits for every house. It's not. It's about the individuals and it's about the individual households. And the priority certainly is making sure that that assessment takes place to identify those needs. That's one of my hesitations in then agreeing a list of which is at times fairly prescriptive. I mean, we're talking about taking every situation uniquely, every individual situation by itself, but then we've set out 3 pages of, and this is what we're going to do. When in fact, I think we can be far more general because there is that level of general agreement. And I know Councillor Muirhead and Pottinger don't like the word reasonable, but I do think that it is something we probably need to include. And I'd be more than happy to include detriment within that, but to talk about if we were to say we would mitigate as far as reasonably possible the detrimental effects on residents. More than happy to agree that. I don't think we need this level of detail. I absolutely think many points in here are very, very useful, relevant. I think the inspections are a great idea. Nobody's talking about setting a limit per room at any point in this, because it is going to be about what the individual circumstances are per household. And if you start putting a criteria to that, you start putting yourself into a box, you start putting yourself into a situation where you say, oh, well, actually, this is what we agreed. We also have to remember, as unfortunate as it might be, the statutory powers of the Council can only go so far. And, I mean, we do also need to take account of any potential legal restrictions that might be on us. And, I mean, I know certainly from a brief conversation with one of the Council's lawyers, we certainly need to be checking points in here against some of these aspects, which is why I would be far more inclined to something along the same principles, but much more general, to say that as far as reasonably possible that we'll mitigate the detrimental effects on residents, because I do think we potentially line ourselves up for trouble if you start getting into this level of detail.
Councillor Blaxler.
Thank you, Provost. I disagree with Councillor Thompson on that. I think we do need this level of detail. I think that one aspect of this whole story which has struck me has been that people have felt they haven't had the assurances they've needed. And I think that this level of detail gives them that assurance. And I think that we have to go out on a limb and offer a bit more than we normally would do, because people are looking for that. And if we don't give specific assurances, I think that people will wonder whether the Council is really being consistent in its approach, and it won't inspire confidence, if you like, in the residents of that street. So I am inclined to support Councillor Muirhead's motion here, because I think we really do need that level of assurance for the residents.
Anybody else? No? You may.
Just to say, my problem with the word reasonable or reasonableness is it's open to interpretation. And what I've tried to do is use the experience that I've had in dealing, not just with this situation, but with other situations where we've been attempting to get people compensated for loss, to try to give a series of... I realise what you're saying, Owen. I'm not saying this list is exhaustive. I'm saying in these particular circumstances that I've outlined, that's how we should deal with it. And I'm asking Council to agree with that. But as far as legal restrictions is concerned, I can't see where there's anything in here that should be giving us legal problems. And to be honest, I'm not saying that you're doing that, but it's this kind of excuse to avoid doing something, is to talk about the potential legal consequences. We're talking about fairness here. We're talking about people. Proven detriment may be a word. I wouldn't want reasonable to be in there because of the fact that it is open to interpretation. But we are talking about proven detriment if we're getting somebody to come and inspect the property prior to the people being decanted. Therefore, we can see what's there. And there'll be an audit trail to that. And there'll be an audit trail that will justify in terms of the public pound, and you know, that we're using money appropriately. As I say, we're not talking about a blank cheque for tenants here. We're just making sure that they've got to be treated in the way that they should be treated when this situation is no fault of their own.
Councillor Thompson.
Perhaps if Councillor Loy might want to comment. Just by way of sort of the position we're in, obviously Councillor Johnston's moved the recommendations in the report. We've got the motion, and I suppose essentially I've made a counter to that, which is the sort of single line, if you like. Maybe when we come to decision, can we take the two if we could take the recommendations in the report, then the other two elements? Is that a sensible approach to take to that? Just if we can do that when we come to that point, Provost.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just to clarify that obviously this is a fairly detailed and lengthy motion. That what we would recommend is that the motion has to be caveated by saying that it's subject to any legal and/or financial restrictions that might be prevalent. The point is, of course, as has been alluded to, the Council is a creature of statute and must act within its statutory powers.
I can't see any legal reasons why like for like isn't part of your statute.
I just think, as a belt and braces approach to this, it's important that if members were minded to accept what's moved here, that it is for the avoidance of doubt, subject to any legal or financial restrictions that may be placed on the Council through statute, because the Council is a creature of statute and can only act within its statutory powers.
If there were legal issues where somebody was legally telling us we couldn't do one or two of the items on there, then there's probably nothing we can do about it. Financial restrictions is a different one. You know, it's got to hit the Council financially, without a doubt. But I don't see that would be something that we need to come into. I can accept what you're saying. If somebody tells us legally you're not entitled to do some specific action that we've called for here, then we can't do it. It's a matter of fact. We can't do it. We can't spend the money if we're not legally entitled to do so. I don't think there's anything in there. You're the lawyer, not me. I don't think there's anything in there that would cause us concerns there. But if there is, I accept what you're saying. But know the financial side of it.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. I think with any prescriptive detailed arrangement, that means we could tie and bind tenants into an agreement that will not take account of any changes that might happen in the future, and then might impose future detriment on them. So I think we have to be careful when we write any agreement up that we anticipate change and accommodate flexibility so that there is no detriment to people in the future. I agree with nearly everything that's written, and I think possibly the wording has to be sorted out and be in a legal framework which accounts for everything that would lead to tenants' aspirations for the future. I think we have to protect tenants.
Mr. Blair.
Thanks, Provost. Listening to the debate, and I fully accept the advice from the legal officer. One word that may help councillors in terms of the level of detriment is demonstrable. That seems to satisfy the financial and the spirit of what both sides of the council are saying. So I just put that in for consideration.
Did you want to come back in again? No.
Obviously, in terms of the financial implications, that would be a matter for the Chief Financial Officer. What I'm saying is that, just to be acting in a prudent manner, we obviously have to be aware that, not having read in detail the motion or having time to fully analyse it, it's just a caveat that we have to build in.
Councillor Milligan.
I'm sure Councillor Muirhead and the group Pottinger are quite happy to accept a caveat saying subject to due processes being followed and approval for the legal team. As Willie Venter says, if we legally can't pay it, we legally can't pay it.
Councillor Johnson.
Can we arrange that councillors can work together on a suitable agreement that would take account of everything that we hope tenants can aspire to, and we can future-proof the agreement?
Councillor Thompson.
And perhaps, I think what is clear here is we're all more or less on the same page here. We're trying to find a way to get to an agreement that benefits the tenants as much as we possibly can, helps them in the very difficult situation. But perhaps the wording that John's talking about would, I don't know, maybe that is something. If we were to mitigate against demonstrable detriment or I can't. It's hot in here.
Getting hotter. Demonstrable or proven, I'm not really fussy. I just reasonable brings in different connotations.
If that was possible, if we were making that change, could we have it as simply as that we're saying that we'll mitigate against demonstrable detriment? And as Councillor Johnson says, perhaps then we can look at some of the detail behind that. But can we have the general agreement even on that, the headline, to say this is where we want to go? Because I think we do need to be very careful when we do get into the level of detail behind this. And if that is a middle ground that we could agree, then maybe that is a way forward we can take that actually lets it move on.
Councillor Montgomery.
I hadn't any intentions of coming in, Provost, because it's not really my area that I represent. But after 9 months, I think this is an example of picking at words, but why we should actually be making a decision today. I think the people that have turned up here today would actually expect us to make a decision. I think Jim's already said that he's willing to accept a formal words and advice from the legal and from for John Blair. And I think we should get this decision taken today. They've waited 9 months, and I think it's about time we got the words actually sorted out. Nobody argued for one or two pieces.
Okay then. Are we okay, Councillor Muirhead?
The point that Owen Thompson makes, if we agree this today, if there are issues that subsequently it transpires that there are problems with, then you would come back to Council with the reasons why they're problematic and we can take a decision on them. But the principle of these decisions, I think, is important that we go ahead with. If it transpires that there are any issues, if it can be drawn to attention and explained exactly why, then we can reconsider the individual circumstance. I can't see how there's going to be any, but if that gets it through, then I'm quite prepared to accept that.
So therefore, we're happy to accept the motion with the legal caveats written in. Is that the general agreement of the Council?
No, sorry, but I'm sticking with to mitigate as far as possible against the demonstrable detrimental effect on the residents. And I think that, as simple as that, nothing else.
Are we happy to accept the motion as amended by the Leader? No. Okay then. We'll move to a vote on the amendment to the motion put forward by Councillor Thompson. Those in favour of the motion put forward by Councillor Thompson, please show.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Those for the motion, please show.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
The motion is passed as amended. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. The meeting is over. Okay. Oh, sorry. I do apologise. You can take your seats again.
And for the avoidance of doubt, we will only be putting an amendment forward. We are happy to accept the proposal, so we accept your motion.
Okay, thank you. We also have to take a Are the Council happy to accept the recommendations in the report? Okay, thank you. Now you can leave.